We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday, March 11th, 2024. Happy 311 Day for some of you rock and roll fans. In this episode, we kick off our 2024 season preview, starting with the Chicago White Sox outfield. Luis Robert Jr. had a terrific 2023 season. What does he have in store for 2024? Can Andrew Benintendi bounce back? And can the combination of Dominic Fletcher and Kevin Pillar be good enough for at least one WAR? We'll discuss the White Sox outfielders in a moment, but later in the show, Cody Stavenhagen of The Athletic covers the Detroit Tigers, and he'll join me in previewing their upcoming season. Joining me now is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com and our beat reporter. It's Jim Margulis and James Fegan. And gentlemen, welcome. Jim, how does your Oscars bracket look?
I don't know if I know any film or actor or role nominated.
That doesn't shock me.
I mainly watch Bluey. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
I love Bluey. I don't have kids, but we put Bluey on for Frank when we leave, and I catch bits and parts because it's not a very long episode. And yeah, it's one of the more entertaining kids shows. So
it's a show about parenting, really.
It is, yeah, and it's a hit, man. Are you a Bluey fan, James?
I have not seen a single episode of Bluey. I did not know you could put it on for dogs, so I guess that's some utility to look forward to when I'm dog sitting. But otherwise, I could probably go. I think I've seen 6 or 7 Best Picture nominees.
Okay.
I don't have a player to like go shot for shot with anymore. I guess Lucas might have some time coming up on his hands where we might chat about it a little bit. But otherwise, It's just me and Lamont being movie nerds in the White Sox clubhouse.
Yeah, he really is, because he posted on Twitter like his letterbox, like who he thinks is going to win and who could win. Also, Dan Hayes of The Athletic, old friend, big cinephile. He loves movies. So we're recording this before they were going to announce Best Picture. I think last I checked before I hit the record on this, Robert Downey Jr. just won Best Supporting Actor. So without knowing who actually won, who do you think deserves Best Picture, James?
Like, two of like the big nominees, like I think Anatomy of a Fall and like Zone of Interest, I haven't seen. So like my contenders are, I guess, like Oppenheimer and Killers of the Flower Moon. I preferred Killers of the Flower Moon. I think that's probably like the subject matter I was more in tune to than like, a bunch of government like researchers kind of stressing out about something they wound up doing anyway in Oppenheimer for like 3 hours. I would say like Killers of the Flower Moon, I went to like an Alamo Drafthouse Theater. I ate a pizza. I drank a massive milkshake. It was like I was unemployed and I did it like 11 o'clock in the morning. It was a lot more like this is an experience I'm embracing, whereas Oppenheimer, I like streamed to my tablet in the Airbnb at spring training, and I was like writing something else while doing it. So it wasn't put in a position to succeed as much as Killers of the Flower Moon was, but I imagine Oppenheimer's probably going to win because it's very like big men thinking very hard about big ideas type of movie, and Killers of the Flower Moon is more like you should feel bad about the fundamental crime of American capitalism, which doesn't resonate with anybody as much. So I like that movie more, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it finish in second or third place in the Best Picture nominee. If Lily Gladstone does not win Best Actress, though, then Lamond and I riot, which will be very quiet, very polite, but it'll be a riot.
Quite right.
Well, that's the Oscars. I watched Oppenheimer from my flight back home from Australia to America, so very little screen, and I almost fell asleep at the end. I don't need to see that movie again. I can appreciate what it was attempting to do with the big theatrics, the remaking of the nuclear test, but yeah, I don't need to see that movie again.
Now, speaking of big men thinking hard about big ideas, the White Sox outfield.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Great segue. Love it. Yeah, let's talk about what we are going to have to watch, this movie, which is the White Sox Outfield. And Jim, let's start with Andrew Benintendi. I thought last year when the White Sox signed Benintendi, you and I were a little bit more optimistic that if he truly did pull the ball more in the air, he would see more home runs at Guarantee Rate Field. And we just saw a lack of power. And then it's the Apple TV broadcast in Seattle, where out of all of the resources, Apple TV is the one that tells everyone, oh, by the way, Andrew Benintendi's still complaining about the Hammond injury that he suffered the season before. And lo and behold, he hits a home run in that game, but that's his first home run of the season. And you're in a big chunk of the season already. And according to Fangraphs, Andrew Benintendi was a 0 WAR player. And Zips is projecting a 1.6 WAR season for Benintendi in 2024. So after being optimistic about Benintendi, and in our last episode making fun of Benintendi's throwing arm, how are we feeling about the projections for Benintendi, and how are you still feeling about the Benintendi signing?
Well, it was weird. Like, I didn't quite know how to feel about Benintendi. Like, I remember you had him as your big White Sox edition. And yes. I was like, I don't know about that, because like, just, he's somebody who doesn't do anything well. He does a lot of things okay. He's kind of like a well-rounded outfielder, but if one thing goes poorly, the rest of his game can cave in. And having seen the White Sox try to sign those guys who don't do anything well, I kind of wondered, like, is this, are they falling to another trap? And then they signed him. I started looking into his batted ball data and the way, like, he was able to adjust his approach from Fenway to Kauffman to Yankee Stadium a little bit before that Hammond injury. And I thought, like, okay, maybe this is finally a lefty who, like, takes special advantage of Guaranteed Rate Field the way, like, Gavin Sheets could, but somebody who is, like, a better defender than Gavin Sheets and more proven and everything like that, better base runner. So I could kind of talk myself into it a little bit about being okay, not like being like Bryce Harper good or anybody else we'd been kicking around as, like, potential killer additions, but like, okay, not the problem. And then he kind of turned out to be the problem. Maybe not the biggest problem. Like, I remember I wrote about his defense in September, and I got a few comments saying like, well, you know, I don't know why you're fixating on this because everything else went wrong. It's like, well, it's September. I finally got around to writing about Andrew Benintendi. I was writing about all the other emergencies and failures that went on. Finally, everything had kind of reached a low smolder to the point where I can finally get around to getting to Benintendi before the end of the year. So that's kind of how I rated it on my priority scale. Like, he was never the worst thing going on, but at the end of the year, you look at what he did and just like, yeah, this is not good for the first year of 5. And of course, because it's the White Sox, the record-setting franchise contract. So now I don't know exactly what to think. I'd like to think that it's as simple as the Hammett, like, killing his power. Because I remember, like, a few months in the season being like, not only has he not hit a homer, he's not hit anything that challenged for a homer. Like, maybe like one ball that, like, was on the wrong side of the foul pole. But otherwise, every time I thought he got into one, it went, like, you know, maybe into the foul territory, like I don't know, 20 feet before the wall, before the corner, and think like, there's just nothing on his bat right now. So I think it could be just recovering from the hand fully, not being pressed in a full-time service and being like this kind of half player and grumbling about it, quietly grumbling about it and just not being happy with himself. But I could also see it being like, well, that's year one. Maybe there's a little bit of a bounce back, but like this was supposed to be when he's peaking. So this could just be like an Adam Dunn, like just slow slide towards like waiting for his contract to end. So I'm trying to separate like, very a very little reason for like him struggling, which is the hand injury, and also just kind of the general way things go for the White Sox, which is just like, if it doesn't work early, it's not going to work late.
James, what's the expectation for Benintendi from a White Sox perspective coming into this season? Because I'm assuming with Tim Anderson not around that Pedro Grifol is going to, with pen, permanent marker, probably put Benintendi as the leadoff hitter, which I know that Benintendi has the ability to draw walks and get on base. I just don't know how effective of a leadoff hitter he's going to be, and we'll talk about his defense in a moment, but what are the White Sox expectations of Benintendi?
Well, it's like, where else would you put him where he'd be perfectly suited? Like, I think during portions of last season, like nothing was really going right, but maybe he was carrying a 340 OBP, and it was almost like it wasn't like a sensational, like on base. It's not like a huge speedster, but he's not going to clog the bases. This is what he's doing, decently. This is what you'd wring out of it. And certainly they didn't have a team where like 340 on base was like not novel. So it was like good enough for him. And so I think that probably look at the roster and think something similar. I can certainly tell you that like Andrew Benintendi didn't think last year was like good or typical. He got like a cortisone shot in the All-Star break, like as recognition of like the hand was like not right all year. And, if you walked up to him, he was very blunt, like, how are you feeling? How are things going? He was like, I'm not hitting the ball hard at all. So that's not really too great. And he'd have like, a good week, or he'd, hit a double to the gap or hit something that bounced off the wall. And I'd walk up to him and be like, hey, feeling any better? Like things seem like they're maybe flicking a little bit. And he'd be like, no, still bad, still no rhythm whatsoever. Just kind of treading water, but like definitely not in a good feeling. Definitely not feeling like I found anything at all. Like still quite bad. Like, so I think he very much assessed it as like, this is the year from hell. This is like the worst I can do. I don't feel right. I don't think it was like, I can't figure out why the numbers weren't there. I felt pretty good, or I felt like I was doing good things. He very much felt it as like, this is the worst thing possible. So is that a reason for optimism? Yes and no. I mean, there's plenty of guys who the new normal has hit them in the face and they thought it was going to bounce back to normal, and it just never does. And so I don't think it's necessary. It's not, I can't tell you it's a good thing that this guy like had the worst season of his career by a reasonable stretch, or at least worst full season in his first year of his contract, when he's the youngest he was ever going to be in a White Sox uniform. But it definitely did seem like he was off, that he was physically hampered at the plate, that he, was doing things to address the pain in his wrist throughout the year, and just wasn't right. And, theoretically should be better if his hand is feeling better. Now, is his hand feeling better? He's kind of saying some of the similar things that he and like his camp was saying at the start of last year. Like, yeah, I'm able to swing full out. I'm able to kind of let it loose. I'm trying to pull the ball in the air. That's all the stuff he was saying in spring training last season. And it was only as like the rubber met the road that the soreness kind of wasn't going away, and it was something compiling, and he wasn't seeing, the consistency of, and he wasn't feeling a rhythm because he couldn't feel confident letting loose his swing. It kind of really, there's nothing really that can happen in spring that makes you convinced like, it's happy times are here again, and it's going to be stable from here. So yeah, I think there's evidence that things were not right, and it was an outlier season, but this is all we've seen, and this is the oldest he's ever been. And there's plenty of reasons to wonder, like, can he ever get back to the levels that, in terms of power production, in terms of pulling the ball in the air, as much as those are his spoken goals, and he's dedicated towards that. And if he's healthy, maybe he'll show some progress. We're starting to be very far removed from the 15 to 20 home run guy showing up. So yeah, there was discrete reasons why it should go away, but what are the big reasons that we're encouraged that 2018, 2019 Benintendi are going to be back.
I put a poll on Twitter asking fans about the Zips projection, which again, you can follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. Follow James at JR Fegan. You can follow me at Sox Machine _Josh. The Twitter poll, the show poll. How are you feeling about the Andrew Benintendi 1.6 WAR Zips projection? 46% believe that Benintendi will finish 2024 with a WAR worse than 1.6. 42% believe he'll beat the 1.6 WAR, and 12% believe that Andrew Benintendi will finish with a 1.6 WAR. So offensively, so far as we record this, Andrew Benintendi, quiet spring. He's 5 for 22, only one extra base hit, a double. And James, going back to you, like, let's say the Hammond injury is still impacting Benintendi and he's lost that hand strength. What is the path of him being a league average hitter at the plate?
I guess just being like a god of OBP, because as a corner bat, it's, as much as I think they tout former Gold Glover, like it's pretty, -3 runs, DRS and UZR across the board. And a lot of it was throwing arm, and how much can you see that really bouncing back in a big way? Certainly didn't seem like, he's operating with like this newfound cannon in spring so far. That really creates like a really low baseline for getting to that 1.6 WAR. We've definitely seen him be a guy where I think the pitch selection, the contact ability is such where there's like the ingredients to be a 340, 350 OBP guy. But how much does that hold up if, the confidence or the fear from the opposition that you can really get hurt in the zone against them isn't there? That where I think if he's not doing anything with 2-strike or 3-0, 3-1 challenge fastballs that really put the fear of God into you, do you start to see even that, the plate discipline skills kind of get canceled out in some way? Ideally the average comes up if he gets pitched that way a little bit, but it has to be kind of really, you start talking about it the way you start talking about like 2021 Nicky Lopez, where like, it was really like a combination of really good chase rates and like elite contact ability. And he's floated near that in the past, but you absolutely need that to like be very solid if there's going to be no power there. And as Jim said, he's really more of a guy who's been an all-around player at times, but never been somebody who's had like these plus skills that you can bank on year in, year out. So it would have to be kind of him maybe really adapting his game to be a specialist in this way. And I don't think that's really the way they're talking. They're more trying to get his strength back, to get him back to being somebody who puts double-digit homers, who has extra base pop, who can pull the ball in the air towards a park where it really benefits you as a left-hander to pull the ball in the air. So I don't think he's really geared to make that. I think it had to be multiple years in a row of like, all right, I just don't have power anymore. I have to model my game around this. And then you're, trying to get a guy who's probably like a 45 runner and defender to be like a punch and Judy hitter. The pieces don't seem to really add up. So I think having a fully healthy hand and hitting 15 home runs is probably the plan from the plus hitter. So good luck to everybody involved.
So a Metroid cannon for his left arm, Jim, and like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, give him a new right hand that he can swing with. That's all we need to do to get Andrew Benintendi fixed. And James alluded to this, like the 45 grade defender, because offensively, Jim, if Benintendi repeats his 87 weighted runs created plus, I just don't see a path on how he could be a 1.6 WAR type of player. Because last year defensively, out of all the left fielders qualified, according to StatCast, Andrew Benintendi was the third worst left fielder defensively in Major League Baseball. He was worth -11 outs above average with a -6% success rate. So on the expected outs on fly balls hit the left field when Andrew Benintendi was there, the White Sox were experiencing -6% success rate on the expected outs. So that's how bad Andrew Benintendi was. We talked about all season last year. Is it positioning? Is it lack of range? Everything on StatCast suggests that Andrew Benintendi was an awful defensive player. Is there any hope defensively of Andrew Benintendi bouncing back so he can at least be a league average defender, Jim?
Well, when looking at his like defense and like the way he accumulated outs above average, like negative outs above average, there was like a case being made that his score was kind of similar to having like the worst qualifying ERA, in that like he was good enough to like not question him being out there. And everybody who is worse, like say Andrew Vaughn or Gavin Sheets, like we've seen worse outfielders out there, like they are only out there if they have to be, or they are replaced for defensive replacements a lot. So they're not there to accumulate the kind of chances you get. Like the success rate was bad, but not like as abysmal as we've seen with Vaughn or Daniel Palka or anybody like that. It was just kind of like an ordinary mediocre or below average. Whereas like he just got a ton of innings. Like he got all his chances or opportunities in left field. So he had plenty of time to just keep rolling up that negative score. So I think like there is risk of overstating how bad his defense is just because he can accumulate it. But when he's not hitting, you know, I guess I would go, you know, speaking of like bad left fielders of years past, like Melky Cabrera, I think was in a similar boat of like, when he's hitting, when he's getting like a 350 OBP and hitting like 10 to 15 homers and being very much the way Melky Cabrera is supposed to be offensively, you look at the defense and like, well, just saw Diane Viciedo out there and he's not that bad. So like we can live with that and hope for better defense elsewhere. But like when he shows up not hitting, like it's a case of like, now what do you do? Like if you're not getting on base, if you're not in a special way, if you're not hitting for any power whatsoever, like what do you bring to the table? And, you know, there are still 4 years of this left afterwards. And how soon is the conversation about like DFAing him and just like moving on? That's a very dark corner to go into 1 year into a 5-year deal, but just, you know, based on trajectories of White Sox free agents past, like it's something where it's in the back of your mind, if nothing else. But I don't think I was surprised by like how slow his reads were, how he just didn't get to the ball sometimes. And I think a lot of it was just kind of like slow to react, just not quite getting there. I think, you know, if you're charitable, you can say, well, he's had fluctuations in his defense before. And maybe like if he's not right physically, it just takes him out of it mentally a little bit, or he carries his offensive struggles to the field. And so he's just not all the way back. Part of me wonders too, like just the weird situation the White Sox were in last year. Like he shows up to a White Sox team that's god awful, and he's the highest, or at least not the highest paid player annually, but has the biggest contract of anybody. And to me, it's weird how irrelevant he was. Just, I don't recall seeing any jerseys of his in the stands, like no excitement when he signed. Very little conversation about how he was or wasn't doing over the course of the season. Like just very surprised, like just how separated he was from everything else. And I kind of wonder if he, you know, and maybe James can speak to this a little bit, put him on the spot, but I wonder if he just kind of carried himself as like a fellow traveler with this White Sox team rather than part of it, just because he showed up, wasn't what he wanted to be. So he's probably kind of focused on like, why am I not hitting the ball harder? How can I, you know, make myself useful getting past this? And everything's collapsing around him and he barely knows what's going on with regards to the whole power structure and everything. So that's my charitable read in terms of how it can get better, but like I didn't see anything physically going on to make me think like he can return to like Gold Glove consideration again.
I mean, he's a quiet dude. He definitely is like not going to be a rah-rah guy. And I think he was kind of walking into an existing clubhouse structure where he didn't think like it was his place to really take charge. And then as everything's going wrong, like it's be a rough place to be like, take the standing of like, he wasn't someone you signed to be like the new sheriff in town. Like I think he would tell you as much. But he seemed well liked in the clubhouse. You know, he was in a lot of group outings and stuff like that. He just wasn't ever going to be like this big culture changer dude. He's more of a guy who kind of tries to show up and does his job and go home and be like very adamant on the being even keel approach and not being I think he was going to be kind of a quiet person who you appreciate, you know, looking at the end of the year, like, hey, he was pretty solid. He was pretty consistent, or, hey, he was always on base. He hit for a little power. He defended pretty well. He did his job and appreciate him that way. So I think he was always an odd fit. Not just because like how valuable he was or not to be like the biggest free agent in history, just because he's not someone who's like suited or like his even mentality wise to be like this big star player, this big like transforms the culture of the team sort of guy. He's very much like comes in, does his job, and you respect him based on how hard he works or how consistent he is. But it is even less like even more background than like Jose Abreu, where his insane kind of work ethic just kind of becomes something of a marvel of his own that everyone watches, but just really a guy who quiet professional would probably be the way everyone describes him. So being the new entry on a sinking ship was a very weird place for him to be, because it's like, what do you want me to do? I'm just coming here, and then I'm dealing with like my wrist being in constant pain. It wasn't a situation where anyone was due to succeed, but certainly not for Andrew Benintendi to look like, wow, what a game-changing free agent signing for someone who's basically just supposed to check every box and not supposed to put a star by any item as far as what he does.
More conversation about the Chicago White Sox 2024 outfield after a quick word from our sponsor. This summer, I'm heading to Boston for the first time and visiting Fenway Park. I get that the Red Sox are popular, but man, the ticket process has not been easy. And the sticker shock when trying to finish the order with the number of fees added on was a rude wake-up call. Then I remembered to check the Game Time app and was able to get a better deal in a more desired section at Fenway. If you don't have the Game Time app, you should get it. Why I use Game Time for all events, not just sports, but I also use for concerts and comedy shows, is that Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seats before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They have all-in prices that show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out and you don't have to worry about that sticker shock that I experienced with other apps. And you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, create an account, and use promo code SOXMACHINE for $20 off. Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, moving from Andrew Benintendi to center field. Luis Robert Jr., no complaints at all on how he performed in 2023. He finally put together a healthy season and exceeded expectations as far as projections, and I think he hit a little bit of the ceiling that we are expecting when the White Sox signed him out of Cuba. Back on the Zips Projections episode, when the Zips Projections were released by our best friend Dan Zaborski of Fangraphs, I asked Dan James if what we saw from Robert in 2023 was going to be his peak performance. And Dan thought so, because Robert has never demonstrated the ability to draw walks and still strikes out at a very high clip. Like, he could still be a 4-5 WAR type player, but if he's going to reach the echelons of like Ronald Acuna Jr. or Mookie Betts, the on-base percentage skills are going to have to pick up. Do you agree that 2023 offensively is the best type of season that Luis Robert could muster for the White Sox?
Good? No. Is that a reasonable expectation? Yeah, absolutely. Like, you can't ask much more than like a guy just kind of turning it loose for 38 homer or 40 around 40 homer power in center field while providing plus defense and pretty good base running. It would be irrational to ask more of him. I think watching him a little bit, especially seeing him be like, around a 20 strikeout guy at times, I kind of watched him with a little bit like, is that the direction he's going into, where he's just going to sell out for power? He's going to be super aggressive early in the count, like real big hacks of like trying to, knock down a light tower, and, some ability to, ratchet it down. He's always had a, much better 2-strike approach than his early count swing decisions. Like, it's a pretty radical difference, but the swing, he wasn't really cutting down the swing to stay alive in big ways. He was still trying to, hit for power, drive the ball, and certainly his environment encouraged him to be that for that offense, where it was, kind of a one-man fast break all the times offensively for him. But you definitely, you've seen ability to hit for average. The bat speed's there to make contact with like a lot of things. Obviously he's never like shown this plate discipline that's been really great or conducive to being an on-base guy in any major way. You kind of wonder if he'll be an on-base guy just from being like aggressively pitched around. it would be the way it happens. But I'd hesitate to say like this guy can't ever come down from being like literally the most chase happy guy in the league. You'd think there'd be some path to refining that in some way. It's never going to be like his plus tool. He's never going to be like Danny Mendick up there with like swing decisions, just because like that's probably the best taste case for like how your tools kind of dictate for how you have to operate at the plate a little bit. He's hit for average in the past. I don't know if you'd sacrifice like 5-10 home runs if you ask for the approach from 2022 a little bit, where he was floating around 290, and you definitely saw him like shoot the ball the other way and do a lot of stuff that like, it's cool that he can do, but you'd probably pick 38 home runs over it. Asking him, I kind of, he's not like the most let me walk you through my plate approach guy I've ever met in my life, but I asked, like, is there a little bit of a conscious choice in, being a power hitter since your strikeouts went up? And he was very quick to say like, no, like my strikeout, and a little bit is like the way Luis is wired. Like he's going to always say he can do more or he can be like this next thing. But he was adamant, like I can strike out less this year and it won't cost my power, or I can refine things still. So he's certainly of the mindset of like that he can merge kind of the two shapes of production we've seen, where he's a little bit more strikeout averse, or he's a little bit more, kind of hit for average and can still be that guy who, at least has like 30 home run pop. I think the big way you could kind of there's clearly like the person who comes into two strikes is not like, Patience of Job type of hitter, but it's so much more kind of refined than the just really aggro, like early count approach, that I would think that there's some sort of middle ground he could reach where a little bit of that sneaks into his at bats earlier in the count in a way where, it puts him in where he can post 330, 340 OBPs. And I think there's going to be just not everyone is trying to pitch him out of the zone as much as possible already, but you think after a 38 home run season, there's going to be a bit more of testing his patience, even more than we've seen in the past, where he's going to have to show some refinement to even keep the power production that he had last year. I would think there's definitely the capability to grow, to refine his chase rate out of like 40% or whatever insane market is right now, or show the ability to change up his swing path a little bit situationally as needed. Though God knows this offense is probably going to be very reliant on Luis Robert solo home runs, just like last year's was. But it also feels bad to be like, hey, can you improve upon like 130 WRC plus with plus defense from center field? We need a little bit more, buddy. Come on. Like that feels like an absurd thing to ask. He's hit any reasonable projection of what you want him to be. If he just does this every year and plays 140 games every year, I don't know what your complaint about Luis Robert is, other than the one time he didn't run the first last year when he may or may not have been hurt and may or may not have told anyone about it. That was weird, but if you play 145 games a year and hit 38 bombs, I think we'll all get over it. Is kind of the approach to be. I think a healthier mindset to him is acceptance, but yeah, I think he could do more. I think he's trying to do more. We'll see.
Yeah. The reason I bring this up, Jim, and why I disagree with Dan is I go back to the 2021 season. I know it's just 68 games, very small sample size, but Robert was outstanding. I mean, 3.4 WAR season in 68 games. He had a 338 batting average. He had an on-base percentage of 378. He slugged 567. His weighted runs created plus was 155. Like, I understand where James is coming from. And yeah, when it comes to expectations, no one should complain if Luis Robert has another 5 WAR season. But I don't think this is his peak. I do think that Robert has the ability to go another tier, which is pretty scary to think about. Yeah, it's not going to probably be from the walk rate, but if he can go back to his 2021 self, I mean, that's a scary player. Like I've talked about this for years, Jim. I still believe Luis Robert can be an MVP type of candidate, despite Mike Trout and Aaron Judge being in the American League still.
Hopefully we're not speaking about Trout in the past tense, like he used to be a perennial MVP candidate, and now he's like, he doesn't quite get there anymore. But yeah, there's an element to like Robert's game or like his resume to where like you could kind of, a la carte it. Like if he had the defense from his first year and then the bat to ball ability in his second year and then the power of his fourth year, he could really like come up with this 8-win player.
Good. Yeah.
Who
that's a good point.
is challenging like, peak Frank Thomas of like the best position player since. Part of me wonders like last year if like he was letting the swing fly because like he felt good pretty much the whole year. Like it was his longest run, I think, since being professional. I guess maybe the COVID season where he played the entire season. But like, he didn't have a hand injury, didn't have a wrist injury, didn't have the hip thing, didn't have the virus that, created some dizziness issues and really kind of seemed to slow him down the field. For the most part, I think until the knee at the very end, like he was pretty much operating at full capacity. And so like maybe he was like, I'm going to let it fly because there's nothing holding my swing back. Like kind of the opposite of Andrew Benintendi. Like I have 2 working wrists, watch this. Whereas Benintendi's just trying to get the bat through the zone. And so he's just having fun with it. Kind of winning long drive competitions, but not really worrying about the short game so much or like laying up. Like that wasn't part of his game. So perhaps, with a little bit of like learning his limitations with that approach, he is able to gear down and then figure out some different swings for different situations. Or like, this guy with a 3/4 slot who throws sweepers away off the plate, like I have to close my front shoulder and really shoot the ball to right. Maybe he can add some elements of that to where like he isn't an easy mark for certain pitchers. Or it might be like, as long as he's healthy, like he's going to be going for max effort swings, max like fun productions, forms of production. And the kind of finer points of his game aren't really something he focuses on because like it is a harder way to make a living. We've seen that with Tim Anderson, like, the hitting over 300 and drawing, or I should say like, working a 350 OBP when you don't draw walks is a very hard thing to do when the BABIP dries up or you just lose the ability to make hard contact on a reliable basis. So as long as you can make hard contact, you want to focus on making hard contact and maximizing damage. So I think that's where I am, to where like if he's healthy, I think we're probably going to see more of this, but I'm open to being surprised. But first of all, I think, it'd be nice to see him have 2 healthy seasons in a row because that's something that's eluded him to this point.
Robert was 20 for 24 in stolen base opportunities last year. Jim, do you want to see Robert steal more often in 2024?
Yes and no. Like this has been something that's come up before with Tim Anderson, going back to him, like, it seems like, he's going to be on a 30 stolen base pace. Like he could be leading the league, with the high efficiency. And then like something happens, takes a wrong step in the field, slips on wet turf or something. And all of a sudden, like he's not running the same way anymore. It's just the wear and tear adds up. And by the second half of the season, he opts out of that part of the game. And, maybe he hits 20 steals, but like, that's kind of it. And so I think with Robert, given how important he is, given how often he's hurt his hand sliding into second and just had some place, I think the knee injury also was a slide. So he's everything I think that's gone wrong for him physically, aside from the hip issue, has stemmed from slides, I think. So really, I'm not all for like him rolling up the stolen bases. I think 20 is a pretty good number with high efficiency. Like pick your spots, especially when he's hitting 38 homers. That's pretty good. If he goes back to a form of like where he's hitting 20, 25 homers, then I think the base stealing has to be a bigger part of his game.
And then moving over to right field, James, are we looking at a Dominic Fletcher, Kevin Pillar platoon to start the season?
Yeah, probably.
Excellent. All right. So that's, no, I'm kidding. No, the reason I bring this up, I like what I see from Dominic Fletcher. I think I'm going to hop on his bandwagon. I can see what Josh Barfield is getting at from his time in Arizona, that he thinks that Dominic Fletcher could be a helpful outfielder. And maybe there is some Adam Eaton, not second version of Adam Eaton joining the White Sox, but maybe first version of Adam Eaton joining the White Sox, where he was a very pleasant surprise and then he became a 6-WAR right fielder all of a sudden for the White Sox. I don't think Dominic Fletcher is going to be that for the White Sox. And Kevin Pillar, I think defensively, with the question of like if Luis Robert can't play center field, I think we've seen so far in spring training, Dominic Fletcher and Kevin Pillar can spell time in center field, and we're not freaking out that there's a defensive liability out in center field. But Jim, the last time the White Sox right field group accumulated more than one WAR on Fangraphs as a unit was in 2017. Last year, they were negative 3.8 WAR as a group. All I am asking is Dominic Fletcher and Kevin Pillar to be worth one WAR, Jim. Can they accomplish this?
God, I hope so, because like they bring like plus defense, which has been the problem with the White Sox right field situation. Like Oscar Colas was maybe supposed to have a boom or bust approach offensively, but he was supposed to be an okay right fielder, like maybe not plus, but like given that he's playing a lot of center in AAA in Birmingham, and like when I watched him there, I didn't see a guy who looked nearly as confused as he did with the White Sox, to where like he didn't know where the cutoff men were. He didn't know like which base to throw to, like the along with uncertain reads. Like sometimes the read was the problem, and then he compounded it with like either, rushing through his actions, picking up the ball and that taking a while, or, throwing to the wrong base to where Elvis Andrus is like trying to coach him up in the dugout, and, people are getting angry with him. So like, that's, I think, the kind of special catastrophe it was last year. And given the track records of Pillar and Fletcher, and given that Fletcher at least showed it to some extent over a couple auditions with the Diamondbacks, like I don't think the defense should sink their value. So if you think like, well, Fletcher's going to be spared, knock on wood, facing any lefties, because the White Sox have shown the ability to like not have Gavin Sheets ever face any lefties. So there's the case that the White Sox know what they're doing with the right field platoon in that regard. Assuming like Pillar's defense doesn't completely cave in on him, which, theoretically it could, because he's, mid-30s, but like if it doesn't happen, like they should be able to be like replacement level easy, which is like damning with the faintest of praise, but like the elements are there. Just, I think if it's going to not work, it's going to be because like Fletcher's approach last year was like figured out and he was a flash in the pan. And there's a reason why like he's not breaking any top 10 White Sox prospect lists except mine, apparently. And, it's not working out. I think
I would have put it there if I did not forget he existed.
All right. Solidarity. But like, I could see him being like, what if he's like actual Andrew Benintendi? Like, what if he's like the rich man or like Andrew Benintendi's the rich man Andrew Benintendi given his contract? But like, what if he's actually has the Andrew Benintendi skill set aside from maybe base running, and Benintendi's just like what the White Sox are hoping to get from Fletcher in his first full season?
Well, again, I hope it's at least worth one WAR. James, are we going to see anyone else involved in this right field conversation? Like, is Eloy going to be part of the conversation? Is Gavin Sheets still considered an outfielder by the White Sox? Like, what other options do they have if Dominic Fletcher gets hurt again? Kevin Pillar, if he's not effective, like, what is plan C, D, and after that?
I mean, I think Gavin Sheets has kind of been get in where you fit in type of situation, where if there are bats to be had or there's a matchup that works for him and he can slide in at first or slide in at DH or slide in at right field, he doesn't really have, it's kind of a beggars can't be choosers situation for him. So I wouldn't be surprised for him to be right field, because like that's his viable spot to see him fit in or get in at bat than, taking Andrew Vaughn's place at first or actually getting DH reps over Eloy, though obviously Eloy's, durability makes that a situation where maybe there would be a fair amount of opening, and Mike Moustakas is not necessarily putting the fear of God into him in terms of his spring production, though in terms of Gavin's spring production, maybe he is. It's kind of like lesser versions of that all up and down, their depth chart. Like you have kind of Zach DeLoach, who's maybe a more power oriented version or left defense oriented than Fletcher. You have a lot of kind of reverse versions of Kevin Pillar in terms of Brett Phillips and Rafael Ortega in camp. As far as people to really carry that weight or be the other side of the platoon, it's kind of funny how much little like there is beyond Pilar in terms of real options. Like Danny Mendick could technically play in right field and hit right-handed since he's done that in the past for this organization. But it's almost strange that like you're looking at the rundown. Kevin Pilar seems to have as like comfortable a spot as anybody as the 35-year-old NRI. Just because like you don't see necessarily a lot of replication of his skill set on the roster. I was looking because Adam Eaton's 6.8 Fangraphs WAR year was like a 117 WRC plus, but like so much of it was just huge UZR on corner outfield defense, which is just a sort of like best way to get a 7 WAR year that doesn't feel like a 7 WAR year in terms of game impact whatsoever. Whereas Dominic Fletcher kind of being, your backup center fielder, so to speak, with someone who maybe not the raw speed to cover that area, but definitely like the competency where you'd think about him out there. He probably could, the one thing is the platoon issue is really keeping him from compiling it. But, I think the best absolute case scenario, he probably could like threaten 110, 115 WRC plus based on like an on base heavy profile against right-handers and like just put up a ridiculously like good WRC or UZR defensive ratings in corners, especially playing a corner next to Luis Robert, where maybe not too much is asked for him to go out of his zone or his area where he could be really aggressive on the lines. He could probably sneak towards that. I wouldn't try to argue to like a layman like this is secretly like the most valuable season that's happening right now, because it almost feels like a bank error in your favorite type of 6 WAR season. But as far as like replicating that sort of Adam Eaton, I don't think there's the same all-around skill set where you could really put that guy out there every day. You can put him against left-handers and expect really kind of similar output. And certainly Adam Eaton was kind of durable in that season in a way that was not replicated in any way afterwards. Maybe because of that season, who knows? But I certainly see where the comp exists for that. It just kind of falls apart in platoon issues because like Kevin Pillar's his viability on righties is more like he runs into one and he has enough raw pop to kind of keep you, above water production wise. If he runs into like, 2 homers a month while, starting twice a week type of situation where I don't think you get quite the same feeling of like peak Brett Gardner that you did when Adam Eaton was rolling. But I feel that part and the fact that like there's not a ton of depth behind Pilar is where maybe that falls apart, but that's kind of like I guess the vision a little bit of what the absolute best case scenario Fletcher would be. It's just that every scout seems a little bit more tepid on him than that, even though that's like the shape of his AAA production and the shape of his like cameo in major leagues that suggests he can do that. I guess the one caveat is that scouts didn't really believe in Adam Eaton either, for similar reasons to Fletcher. So it's not the first name I think of let's go find another one in White Sox history, but it is a strangely similar setup. I almost just wish that they had. It's a weird thing to want more of, but I wish they had more platoon righty corner outfielders to stack the roster with, so that it's not all on Kevin Pillar. But 2024 White Sox, it's all on Kevin Pillar's shoulders.
It's all on you. Again, 1 WAR. That's all I'm asking. 1 WAR to end the season, White Sox right fielders. We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors, but coming up next, Cody Stavenhagen of The Athletic will join me to talk about the Detroit Tigers, why Tarek Skubal and his AL Central hype continues to build, why Javier Baez may not be better offensively, and who is the Tigers player to watch out of camp. Next on the Sox Machine Podcast.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
We begin our 2024 AL Central previews with a team that the Chicago White Sox will be playing on opening day, Thursday, March 28th. It's the Detroit Tigers. Last year, the Tigers finished in second place in the AL Central with a 78-84 record, falling 9 games back of the Minnesota Twins. However, when you break down their record, they got beat up by the American League East. They finished 7-25. As you go further, the Tigers last year were 35-17 against AL Central opponents. That's a .673 winning percentage. So on paper, if there's any team that's going to be a serious challenger to the Minnesota Twins in 2024, it's probably the Tigers. So how are they looking during spring training? And can AJ Hinch lead this squad to an above 500 record finally? Well, joining me is a friend of the podcast. He covers the Detroit Tigers in Major League Baseball for The Athletic, also hosts Turning the Corner podcast. It's Cody Stavenhagen. And Cody, thanks for joining the Sox Machine podcast again.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Let's quickly revisit the 2023 season for the Tigers. Does this organization feel any regret not finishing with a better record when you consider just how good they were against their AL Central rivals?
Well, I'm glad you threw those stats out there because they are pretty fascinating. The Tigers were great against the Central and not great against everyone else, especially the AL East. There were a couple times I asked AJ Hinch something to the effect of, do you wish you played the Central more? Of course, the year MLB introduced the balanced schedule is the year the Tigers were great against their own division. It was also an indictment of the AL Central, baseball's worst division, one of the worst divisions in the history of the league last year. Looks like it could be pretty weak again this year. But overall, I think the Tigers were pleased to finish with 78 wins last year. They got off to a really brutal start, which it seems like has been the case the past several seasons. Started 2-9, felt like the season was over, but played really good ball later in the year. Kept things somewhat interesting into the summer, given the weakness of the division, and really turned it on in August and September. I think the goal for the Tigers last season was to show some progress, show signs that the organization is heading in the right direction, that they have some young hitters on the rise. They check those boxes. So now those are the questions. Can you take the next step? Can you actually become a contender? Can these young players make linear progress? One of the harder things to do in the entire sport. Those are the questions for the Tigers coming in. Right now in spring, everyone feels optimistic. Everyone feels like everything's headed in the right direction. But I think we'll learn a lot more starting with opening day in Chicago.
Yeah, the Tigers in the second half last year finished 43-38 after 35-46 of the first half of the season. So has AJ Hinch given you any clues during spring training on what he may be tweaking as far as preparing for the 2024 season, that they can continue building the momentum that they started in the second half of 2023?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think getting off to a better start is at the top of everyone's minds. The Tigers have had pretty brutal Aprils in all three of Hinch's seasons as manager in Detroit. How do you actually make that happen? That's not the easiest question to answer. I think coming into camp prepared with a little bit of a head start might have been a subtle focus. You had position players in camp a week or two before even pitchers and catchers officially reported. Most pitchers seemed to come to camp already stretched out, already throwing hard. You had guys like Tarek Skubal hitting 99.5 on the second day of camp. You can argue whether that's actually beneficial. There's almost a sense, are guys too ready? But that might have been one step forward, just to try to ease out some of that adjustment that can happen early in the season. The Tigers definitely seem to accelerate their ramp up this spring. I think with that in mind, that they can't afford another slow start if they want to be taken seriously at all. Helps the schedules looking a little bit easier for them. They had a pretty brutal stretch, opened in Tampa, went straight to Houston. It wasn't easy for him last April. His schedule should be a little more favorable, so we'll see if that actually makes any difference.
Let's talk about Tarek Skubal. He will be the Tigers' opening day starter against the White Sox. According to DraftKings, Skubal has the fifth best odds of winning the American League Central in 2024. So there's some hype, Cody, for Skubal coming into this season. And we know that he's got great stuff, but he's never pitched more than 150 innings in his season so far in his young career. What has Skubal done differently this offseason and maybe this spring, other than throwing 99.5 miles per hour already? So what has he done differently so he could stay on the mound and take the ball every fifth day?
Yeah, I actually don't think he's done a ton differently. Skubal had flexor tendon surgery that caused him to miss the first half of last season, but after he got back in July, I think he led all American League pitchers in Fangraphs wins above replacement. Had a dynamite ERA, struck out more than 10 hitters per 9 innings. This guy's been really, really good when he has been healthy and on the mound. Obviously, staying healthy is a big question, but Skubal, since coming back from that surgery, has felt like his arm has been in a really good place. I think some of the rest of the league is just now starting to hear, oh, Tarek Skubal, is this guy any good? White Sox fans may have a better idea of just how good Skubal can be, although the Sox have actually beat up Skubal a little bit in the past. I'm looking right now. He's got a 4.73 career ERA against the White Sox. But the bottom line, Skubal already, I think, is one of the better left-handed starters in the American League. This year, he has the potential to become one of the best pitchers in baseball. Seems like his arsenal's in a good place. He really hasn't tweaked much because he finished last season so strong. He felt like he just needs to keep doing what he's doing.
Yeah, one of the stories I'm going to be following in the AL Central is this Tarek Skubal against Cole Reagan's competition, because Reagan's is throwing, I don't know, White Sox fans, if you've been paying attention to Royal Spring Training, and we'll preview them on the podcast in a couple weeks here. Reagan's looks terrific. And he was terrific last year for the Royals. So this conversation from an AL Central, like who's got the best lefty, is going to be a fascinating watch throughout the entire season. So outside of Skubal, how does the rest of this Tigers starting rotation look? Because they did lose Eduardo Rodriguez to the Arizona Diamondbacks this offseason.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think internally the Tigers feel really good about their pitching staff. Then you look externally, there seem to be some questions. Fangraphs projections doesn't seem to love the Tigers rotation. I think it has them in the bottom third in terms of projected WAR, projected ERA. But the Tigers definitely devoted a little bit of resources to pitching. That was probably their biggest focus this offseason. They lost D-Rod, but signed Kenta Maeda, signed Jack Flaherty, a guy they're hoping can be a little bit of a bounce back project. And of course, there's still a lot riding on their young pitching. Casey Mize, who has not been healthy. He's back after missing all of last year with Tommy John surgery, former number 1 overall pick. So we'll see if he can get himself back on track. Matt Manning, a guy who's been billed as having this high ceiling. We haven't quite seen him put it all together. He's also struggled to remain healthy. A couple of those were freak accidents. He took 2 comebackers off his foot, broke his foot twice last year. Kind of crazy. Reese Olson, tremendous finish to last season, a little bit more unheralded than Mize and Manning, but asserted himself as a young pitcher to watch as well. So the Tigers are actually going into spring training with 6 starting pitchers competing for 5 spots. We'll see how that one could shake out, but we could see a really talented pitcher like Mize, Manning, or Olson open the season in AAA. So the Tigers view that as a good problem to have. They think Maeda, he's an experienced guy, can generate some strikeouts. People in this division are familiar with him, brings a little bit of a veteran presence. I think the wild card is kind of Flaherty. The Tigers seem to see something they really like. I've never been quite as sold. That was the one signing this offseason that the Tigers made. I scratched my head a little bit. But the bottom line is the Tigers seem to like what they have, and they feel like they have some depth, not only in those 6, but some other guys on the farm who are either have already debuted or might be pushing for the major leagues this year.
Yeah, I feel like the Detroit Tigers, would you agree that when you look at the entire Major League Baseball, the starting pitching for the Tigers, like you mentioned the projections, not friendly to the Tigers, but if there's any position group from any team that could exceed expectations by a great margin, I feel it's like this Tigers starting rotation, Cody, because of the things that you pointed out. Yes, there are some red flags and some exclamation points next to some guys. But as we always say with the White Sox, if they stay healthy, if this Tigers rotation stays healthy, as you mentioned, there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And look, I think the Tigers aren't quite the Cleveland Guardians or the Rays in terms of becoming a pitching factory, but they seem to be really optimistic about what they're doing on a developmental level. We've seen small examples of some of the fruits that are possible. Michael Lorenzen was kind of their project last year. They brought him in. He had a terrific first half. They traded him to the Phillies. He threw a no-hitter. Things kind of fell apart from there, but one of the reasons the Tigers signed Flaherty and Flaherty came to the Tigers, he and Lorenzen share the same agent. Flaherty seemed really excited about his meetings with Scott Harris and AJ Hinch and pitching coach Chris Fetter, some of the tweaks they feel like they can make. They've got a guy like Reese Olson, who's really raised his ceiling in just a couple of years' time. Some other guys in the bullpen who have really improved their games. So Detroit seems to really believe in its process. And if the Tigers are correct, that could be something that gives the staff a lot more upside than the average fan might realize.
I am a huge Chris Fetter fan, and I'm still insanely jealous the Tigers have him as the pitching coach and not the White Sox. So I'm high on the Tigers pitching, and we know that they can play some defense. Offensively, as we record this episode, Javier Baez is 1 for 15 this spring with 7 strikeouts. He had a sub 600 OPS last year. He had a 62 OPS plus in 2023 and was challenging Tim Anderson for worst offensive position player in the major leagues. Cody, let me just be straightforward with this question. Is Javier Baez a bad hitter now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can really sugarcoat it. The numbers say he was the second worst qualifying hitter in the major leagues. We haven't seen anything markedly different this spring. There was a lot of talk that it was going to be a transformative offseason for Baez. He mentioned dealing with some back and some core issues last season. Supposedly those were sorted out. There was going to be a little less extraneous movement in his swing, maybe a little less coil in his load. But so far, granted, it's only 15 at bats in spring training, but Javi Baez's swing looks the exact same to me, maybe a little less coil, but there's a really, really long bat path. He kind of jerks it toward the pitcher in his load. So he's trying to get the barrel from above his head through the hitting zone. That's just a lot of movement. He doesn't catch up to fastballs anymore. He's late constantly. We haven't seen much of a willingness to make true adjustments. I think the Tigers are realistic in that he's not going to be 2018, 2019 Javi Baez ever again. They would like him to be able to catch up to fastballs, maybe generate a little more power than he did last season. If he can hit 20 homers, play plus defense, maybe you live with the rest. But based on what we've seen so far this spring, it's fair to wonder if even 20 homers, low batting average, low on base percentage is possible. He really just looks overmatched at the plate.
I'm sure no one within the Detroit Tigers front office would speak on the record with the question I'm going to ask. But from your insight covering this team, do the Tigers have buyer's remorse with Javier Baez because he is still owed $98 million guaranteed over the next 4 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think how could you not? You know, he was signed under the Al Avila front office, so Scott Harris is now in charge. So it's, he's not the one with buyer's remorse, but he's the one who most likely feels like he inherited a bad contract. Baez just has not performed up to that level. There is an aspect where I think the Tigers feel like they could still be worse off at shortstop. It can be hard to get a good shortstop in the major leagues. Baez, especially in terms of outs above average, graded out really well defensively last year. His throws can still be a little bit frustrating, but he's a good defender. I think he remains a plus defender in the field. So maybe you can live with some of the other flaws in his game. But then when you look at what he's getting paid in excess of 24, 25 million, that's where it really hits home. And it's like, okay, if the offense isn't getting better, he's continuing to get older. There were always people who worried that Javi Baez had a play style that would not age well, given his reliance on natural gifts, talent, bat speed. We're already probably seeing those things diminish a little bit. Can he adjust into his 30s? So far, the answer to that has been no. So it's like, okay, can you really make this work for 4 more seasons? It's a pretty concerning question when you really zoom out and think about it.
In Chicago, patience, I'd say, is thinning with Andrew Vaughn. He's not meeting expectations of being a top 5 pick. The Tigers have Spencer Torkelson, who's a former number 1 overall pick. Now, the counting numbers were good last year. He played 159 games, he had 31 homers, and had 94 RBIs. But the slash line, a .233 batting average, a .313 on-base percentage, that's not good. And despite the counting numbers and playing 159 games, Torkelson just had a 105 OPS plus. How are the Tigers feeling about Torkelson's future potential?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there was a lot of optimism around Torkelson last year because, even into May, June of last season, I think there were real questions. Is this guy going to be able to hit in the major leagues? In 2022, he hit 203. He only hit 8 homers. 2023, he got off to a really slow start. And then it seemed like the ball started flying off his bat. The homers started to come in bunches. It was a little bit of an exhale, I think, for the Tigers, for their front office. And all right, the power that got this guy drafted #1 overall is still there. They think he does some things at the plate really well in terms of his ability to cover the whole plate, to use all fields, even though there was more of an emphasis actually on being able to pull a little more, unlock some of that power. So the mood around Torkelson was great. The local BBWAA chapter voted him Tiger of the Year. I didn't vote for Torkelson. I got to be honest. It's not because I don't like the guy, but it's what you just spelled out. His actual numbers left a lot to be desired. He was worth only 1.4 wins above replacement. In terms of defensive runs saved, he had the worst defensive season by a first baseman since 2017. So although Torkelson did some really good things last year, there's a lot for him to build on. Internally, the Tigers seem to think there's signs that, hey, this guy did what we needed to see last year. If he can become a little bit more of a complete hitter, he's going to be in a good spot. And I think he's a good enough athlete that he can clean things up defensively. I think we have to go out and see him prove that, the on-base percentage has to be higher than 313. The strikeout rate at 25% is probably a little bit high. And then the defense, it absolutely has to be better. It was almost inexplicable at times figuring out what the problem was. I think there were some routine plays that he would just kind of boot. Like it was almost like he didn't have soft hands. Torkelson talked a little bit about working on balls to his backhand side, adjusting with the lack of the shift, realizing he needed to go chase those balls and make plays. So I'm pretty interested to see what we're going to get from Torkelson this year. It might be telling in that, is there still a really high ceiling player in here, or is he going to end up something more like a league average first baseman who can hit for some power, but maybe not do a whole lot else?
Yeah, because I'm not trying to be unfair to Torkelson, but Cody, 159 games, 31 homers, 94 RBIs. That first baseman, in my opinion, should be worth at least 3 WAR. As you mentioned, 1.4 WAR because the defense is really bad, and he doesn't have great on-base percentage skills because he doesn't have a very high batting average, so the contact is not great. Like, if Torkelson repeated his home run and RBI numbers in 2024, like, I don't know, am I unfair to say the baseline expectation is a 3 WAR season from Torkelson if he reproduces those power numbers?
No, I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it. You want, obviously, that the power numbers are now the baseline. So can the OBP come up? Can the defense be, even if it's minus defense, can it still be better than last year? That'd probably do him a lot of favors in terms of WAR. So that's, in a way, almost a positive way to look at it. Like, maybe he doesn't have to go that far to be a 3-win first baseman. At the same time, he has to go out and prove that on the field.
And then offensively, outside of Torkelson and Baez, who should White Sox fans be worried about or paying attention to for the other Tigers hitters?
Yeah, I still think Riley Green is the highest ceiling player on this team. I still think he's one of the highest ceiling players in the American League. This is a guy who, at the time of his debut, was ranked as the top prospect in baseball. Yet another Tiger who just hasn't been able to stay healthy. But when Riley was healthy last year, he was really good at the plate. He had a month-plus stretch where he was hitting over 350. I think he needs to get to his power a little bit more in the major leagues. We haven't quite seen maybe the power potential that could be in that bat. There's some swing and miss in his game, but even in 99 games last season, he hit 288. He was worth 2.3 WAR. And I don't think he was even scratching what his ceiling could be. So you can see why there can be a really good hitter there in Riley Green if he's able to stay on the field. Kerry Carpenter, another guy, DH, corner outfielder, hit 20 bombs last year. An unheralded prospect, unlike Green and Torkelson, but a guy who, since he's been in the big leagues, really has just done nothing but rake finished a little bit slow last season to where like maybe people have kind of forgot about him. But he had a 121 WRC plus last year, 124 WRC plus as a rookie. Based on what we've seen on Kerry Carpenter so far, it's like this is one of those guys who just comes out and mashes. So I think those are two guys who can definitely be forces for the Tigers this season.
Yeah, we have our 30-team fantasy baseball league draft coming up for Sox Machine, and I'm hoping people forget about Kerry Carpenter because he could hit 25
Right.
homers this year and be like, where did this guy come from? Oh, yeah, he was pretty good last year, and I'm glad you mentioned Riley Green. I'm a big Riley Green fan, too. I think he could be one of those guys, if he puts it together, easily a 4+ WAR type of player for Detroit. Finally, including everyone, which Tigers player that you think is flying under the radar and fans outside of Detroit should pay more attention to with this Tigers roster?
Ooh, that's a good question. I might have to think on that one for a second. I mean, one of the guys, that's been the talk of camp has been Andy Ibanez. Definitely not a big name, a guy who came to the Tigers last year off waivers. He was actually the Rangers opening day third baseman in 2022, but hit only 218 last year. He came to Detroit and, he was used somewhat as a platoon player, right-handed bat, known for crushing lefties. He had a 103 WRC plus, but he had an 819 OPS, I believe, after June. He played really good baseball, and he's been just crushing the ball in spring training this year. Still probably more of a platoon-type bat. He's going to play some third, play some second. Maybe we'll even see him in first, at first, or in the corner outfield spots. But one of those kind of back into the roster guys who could be just like a pesky out, one of those guys you get tired of seeing over the course of the season. He's definitely a name that jumps out.
What about Colt Keith? Because he's someone that I've circled that I'm going to be paying attention to because they sign him to a contract extension. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it does not work for teams. I speak as a White Sox podcast host. What are the feelings about Keith coming into this season? I guess what are the expectations for Colt Keith coming into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, the Tigers obviously love Colt Keith. That's why they gave him a pre-debut extension. Another guy who's done nothing but hit in the minor leagues. I mean, I think his sheer hit tool is really good. I think there could be a pretty high floor for his offensive game. So I think that's kind of thing. This is a guy who can be a 280 hitter with 20 plus homers, maybe for the bulk of his career, is probably how he's viewed. I think we will have to see, how does his game translate facing premier stuff every single day. We've seen other talented hitters like Spencer Torkelson take a long time to make that adjustment. And then, how much power can he actually get to, I think is a question as well. I think I would grade out the hit tool better than the power tool at this point. When I look at Colt Keith, I think the defense is the biggest question mark. This guy's huge. He's built like a tight end. I mean, in a good way, he's a tremendous athlete, but he's playing second base right now. And watching him this spring, I think he's improved in terms of his footwork, his movement from a year ago when he was playing primarily third. But he still doesn't look like a second baseman. I think he looks a little clunky around the bag on double play balls. Some questions about his arm were probably the main reason he moved from third to second. Can he be serviceable at second is the question. And long term, I mean, I have a hard time believing he's going to be a second baseman for the bulk of his career. But it's obviously the hit tool that got him this far. And as the esteemed Jim Leland would say, if he hits like Jeff Kent, no one's going to care what his defense is at second base.
That is true. That is very true. Well, you can follow Cody on Twitter for news about the Detroit Tigers. He's at Cody Stavenhagen. Read his always excellent work about the Tigers and Major League Baseball in general for The Athletic, and add Turning the Corner podcast to your downloads wherever you listen to podcasts to get the most up-to-date information about the Detroit Tigers for this upcoming season. Cody, as always, thanks again for joining the Sox Machine podcast.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
That will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Again, thank you to our guest, Cody Stavenhagen of The Athletic, for joining us as we will continue to preview other AL Central teams and other position groups for the Chicago White Sox in future podcast episodes. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine For those following along with our 2024 MLB draft coverage, I just posted a video of Chase Burns and his 14 strikeout performance against Duke this past weekend. You could check that out again at youtube.com/SoxMachine. Follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow me at SoxMachine_Josh. And of course, follow James Fegan at JR Fegan. If you enjoy our work and you want more and you want full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox, you can get that at patreon.com/SoxMachine. Monthly plans start at just $5, and again, that grants you full access to all the coverage for this upcoming season, as James Fegan will be on the road and he'll be covering all the home games for us this season of Chicago White Sox baseball. And we also have additional tiers as well if you want more from us at Sox Machine. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.
I'm Mark Chapman. Welcome to the Planet Premier League podcast. Each week, Cesc Fabregas, Nader Manua and myself talk all things Premier League.
As a player, you don't have time to talk. No. You don't have time to make a plan. You just need to deal with wave after wave after wave.
We watched Coach Carter and he said, afterwards, the game's just about doing this for your teammates. And I remember looking around halfway through the film and half the squad was asleep.
Planet Premier League. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.